Welcome to the webinar. We'll get started shortly. Before we begin, here's how to earn CPE credit. Unlike traditional CPE webinars, there are no polling questions or attendance checks during the presentation. Instead, you will demonstrate your knowledge by taking a brief multiple-choice quiz in the Earmark app. Search for the free Earmark app from the App Store or Google Play Store, or scan the QR code on the screen. Open the app and create an account. Be sure to use a valid email address because we'll email you your CPE certificates. From the home screen, scroll down to find the course. You can also tap the magnifying glass icon to search for the course. Tap on the course artwork, then the Enroll button. On the Course tab, you'll find the recording and quiz questions. If you don't see the quiz yet, don't worry. We'll email you when the quiz is available. Complete the quiz to earn your CPE certificate. If you have questions or need help, email us anytime at support@earmarkcpe.com. Now, on to the webinar.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, to drive action with your client communication. I'm Joel from the Earmark team, and if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the comment section. And with that, I will turn it over to our host for today's webinar, Will Hill.
Well, thank you, Joel. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who has joined us for today and is watching this webinar. My name is Will Hill, and I think about, a lot of things frequently. But I think about a time in my earlier working career when I was working at a large software company. And one of the development managers came to my manager and said, "Hey, we know Will's a really smart guy." That he may not have said that, I don't know. But we don't know that we really like working with him. And I was the lead of a particular product that he was also the lead of in his area. And so my boss came to me and said, "Hey, you got a problem. You got to figure this out." And as he and I talked and worked through things, about 6 months later, he went back to my boss and said, "Hey, my whole team likes to work with Will more than anyone else." And what was curious to me is I feel like I didn't change that much. I was still the same person, still had the same terrible sense of humor. All those things were the same, but they felt differently. And so I went back and just reflected on what was it that I changed. And here's what I changed. I changed the way that I communicated. And it had a world of difference. So I want to share with you some of these key steps that I took in changing this and that I've seen other people take as I've shared with others, and they have had results as well that are very successful, both internally, but more importantly, and why we're here today with client communications as well. As I mentioned, my name is Will Hill. I'm the owner of Will Hill Consults, and I have been serving the tax accounting profession for quite a while. I've physically been in over 400 different firms, working through whether it be software implementation, business process consulting, client engagement strategy work. All those sort of things are things that I love to help firms with, of all different shapes and sizes. So that's just a little bit about me, and it's weird to talk about yourself with yourself on screen. So we're going to move forward. Let me give you just a little bit of insight in terms of how we're going to guide our conversation today. We're going to talk a little bit about communication problems to start, and then we're going to spend the bulk of our time together in the section that I've entitled The Formula. Now, as you know, all formulas work all the time. It's magic. All we have to do is say it, and all our problems will disappear. But we'll talk through the formula and how is it going to help us see an improved result in our communications as we drive for results. And then we'll talk a little bit as we wrap up about how do we stick with change as we go through. If you do have questions or comments as we drive in, feel free to jump into the comments section, drop those in, and I'm going to try to pay attention to those as we move through our time together today. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about communication problems. First of all, they do exist. Okay, they do exist. And we have to think about this in three different areas. One, we need to acknowledge it. If we do not acknowledge that communication problems exist, we're not going to be willing to do something different to get a different result. Sitting here being frustrated about communication and going, "I can't believe they just don't get it," and putting our to the same brick wall is not going to yield the kind of result that we want. Instead, we have to really say, hey, you know what? Communication problem happened. I shouldn't be surprised. They happen a lot. Let's dig in and see what we need to do. And as part of digging in to see what we need to do, we need to own our own part. Or as I'm speaking to you, I want you to own your part of this. Yes, I cannot, as they say, I can say it for you, but I can't hear it for you. Maybe you can hear it, but I also can't understand it for you. That's up to them. But what am I doing as it relates to this communication that can help drive understanding even further? So I just have to look at it and say, what are the things I'm responsible for? My mode, my frequency, my tone, all those things that I can control and produce a different result. Now, the third thing I want you to focus on is putting on their hat. Now, this is a common business saying, you got to put on the customer's hat. And it's easy to say, but I got to tell you, we don't do it very well. We do not do it very well. And the part that we don't do is we often don't think about the entirety of what's going on, and we don't take off our own hat. So I don't want to put the customer hat on top of mine because the customer doesn't know what I know. Instead, I've got to make sure I take my hat off entirely and put their hat on, and think a little bit about things such as, hey, are they reading this email on their phone or their laptop most likely? Are they in a stressful time? And my clients are all accounting firm owners. So I tried to keep my email communications to a bare minimum during tax season. Because I know here's a stressful time. I don't want to add to it. I don't want to try to pull you out of rhythm while you're trying to get heavy work done. Are you thinking about that when it comes to you with your clients? And what else is happening as I put on their hat? Hey, we got to get this stuff done so they can get their acquisition finished. An acquisition is a stressful time. Have we thought about the stress that they're under when it comes to how we communicate and how they're going to receive and read or hear our communication? And then we also have to just kind of assume that they're busy. And so they're not going to act on it right away. Will it be rememberable? Will it be memorable? Will it be something they can remember and act on later? Have we facilitated that action? We also need to think about, is the value or the risk clear to them? Because as we put on their hat, part of taking off our own hat is separating ourselves from knowing the value proposition, from knowing the risk elements that they're walking into, and making sure that's part of the communication. So this is really the hardest part, is taking my hat off first when I put their hat on. And it's why it really does bear some emphasis for us today. So communication problems exist, but there's some things we can do about it. We've got to own that. And the first part of owning that is really putting on their hat while we take off our hat as we go. So let's just pretend for a moment. And if you've got some paper nearby, or you're typing some notes, because I could tell everyone's paying full attention right now. No one's multitasking. You've got a notepad over there to take notes during this course. I appreciate that. Well, let's pretend you've got an existing client. And with that existing client, your relationship is that we do a quarterly review of the books. We take care of business taxes, as well as taking care of the owner's individual tax. And it is tax time. And in your tax projection meeting, they told you that they paid estimated payments. But as you're looking, here we are, February or so, cleaning up the books. We don't see that estimated payment in the books. We need to know, was it really paid? How much, before us to go ahead and complete the tax return? So let's say we go to give them a call. They don't answer the call. How do you write the email? Let me just give you 30 seconds. Maybe you're just writing some bullets down. What do you say to them in email? What do you say? Write it down so people don't think the stream is paused. I'll keep talking quietly and being annoying. But what are you going to say? Just your gut reaction. Quick email. We're in the thick of it. We got to get this done, fulfill our time promises. Okay. I hope you've written down at least the start of that. Maybe a few bullets of, hey, I need to tell them this. All right. If someone wants to be so bold and put it in the comments, that is absolutely fine. And I may use that as a bit of an example as we go in through a little bit more. Some of you may have found that easy. Some of you may have found that, like, I don't know, or perhaps it's so easy, I feel like I'm doing it wrong. And we're going to get into that a little bit of how do we find for ourselves a super secret formula. You say, Will, what do you mean by a super secret formula? Well, I mean a formula that we can use. Now, this hurts me a little bit as a dog person, but our super secret formula is catnip. And we have a formula that can help us appear as more of a superhero, perhaps, than we truly are. And this is a great way to remember the core of these communication elements that we're going to get into. And what you're going to find is that this is not just a theory we have to memorize and then work through, but there are actionable steps that you can take today on your very next client communication. Now, I may use written communication as a lot of my example, but this applies in verbal communication as well. So it doesn't really matter the type of communication that is proceeding. This is what we're going to work through. So let's get in. What on earth do we mean by catnip? Well, we've got a little bit of an acrostic here for you. The C in catnip stands for context. Context. What on earth do I mean here? Well, when you're requesting something from a client or directing a client to take an action, you know why you're doing it, because you're the expert. This should not be a surprise that you know why you're having a client do something in particular. You truly are the expert, but they may not know why. Or perhaps you told them why 6 months ago, and a lot has gone on. And again, put on their hat, take off yours. They're not going to remember a verbal instruction from 6 months ago or all the details of a conversation as to why something's important. We must tie action to results. If we're simply asking for action to take and we're not tying it to the result, then we're going to have trouble in our communication. So that is another part of the context, is to tie it to the results. And we need to make sure that we assume nothing, except that somewhere in our communication, we've got an assumption, right? And then we've got to find it. So anytime we're communicating, we start to give a direction, we've got some kind of hidden assumption in there, not on purpose, but we just have to ask ourselves, where's my assumption? Oftentimes that is, I'm assuming they remember our conversation from December when I told them about how much we were going to fund the HSA next year. Or I told them, I needed the receipts for these other transactions, right? We have to assume that they're not going to remember the details of that conversation. That might be the assumption, as an example, that's in there. So what really makes up context, right? We can say context, but we can mean different things in the context. So here are kind of the two ingredients that I think are critical for the context. The first is, why are you communicating? I lied, I have 3 ingredients. Sorry. Why are you communicating? We need to tell them, hey, I'm reaching out because we're trying to complete your tax return. I'm reaching out because you asked for my help in the middle of your acquisition due diligence, right? I need to tell them why we're communicating. Second, I need to make sure that the impact is there. When I said that we have to tie things to results, oftentimes that's really the impact portion of that statement. What is the result? What's the impact? The third thing that makes up context is emotion. Say, Will, we're accountants. We try to hide all emotion. Okay, I get it. But there is emotion that's involved in both parties' end on the communication, your emotion and their emotion. And really, I'm focusing here on their emotion. What is their emotion going to be? How do we understand that? And how do we respond in advance or proactively take a different step in our communication because of what their emotion is likely to be? And now either we know the emotion or we don't of the recipient, right? If we know it, we need to acknowledge it. If they said, Will, I'm really stressed out right now. we're trying to get this done with this merger, and I need these numbers, and yet there's something they haven't done for us. I need to acknowledge that and say, hey, Joel, I know you're stressed out with the merger right now. Here's what I need from you so that I can complete my particular task. So if we know the emotion for sure, I want to reflect that emotion and acknowledge that emotion. Here's a trick though. We often assume emotion. So if we feel like I'm asking them something every 10 minutes or every 2 days, I must be being annoying to them, but they've never said it. We don't start an next communication with, hey, I know this is just kind of an annoying little request. What you've done there is something I call seeding the emotion, right? Now I've just asked them to please be annoyed with me. That's all I've done. Now, if they've already told me, hey, every time you email me, I get annoyed with your communication, then I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that annoyance level of emotion. But if they haven't, I don't want to seed it. Don't project your guess of their emotion on them. Let them have their own response. So instead of saying, I know this is an annoying little request I have for you, say, hey, I know we're trying to accomplish this together. Here's the request that I have of you right now. I don't need to put any emotion in that's negative if they haven't already told me they've got a negative emotion with that. And I think another secret with this context truly is that your directness is appreciated. Your directness is appreciated. So when we talk about context, and I've been talking about context for a few moments, I'm not asking you to type a miniature novel that is setting all the context, because directness is valued. So my context needs to be short, sweet, to the point. What am I doing? If there's an emotion, I acknowledge that. Hey, here's why this matters. I'm tying it to the result, and then I'm going to get into the rest. But I want to set short, brief, very direct context. Think about it from yourself. If Will Hill Consults were to send you an email or to call you on the phone, the first thing you're thinking is, it's the middle of the day. I'm running my business. I have stuff to do. What do you want? Why are you calling me? Your clients are thinking the same thing, even if they've engaged you to work together. They're thinking that too. Hey, I'm trying to build these houses going on. Why are you reaching out to me right now? What do you need? I'm busy. I got my other clients at my throat all day long. So that quick context helps level set for them, clear the other stuff out, focus in on what you need them to be focused on. All right. Checking for comments. Someone did ask me, hey, do we always have to set context even if we've been in communication all week long every day? And my answer, frankly, is yes, but it just evolves and likely shortens. My context on Monday, hey, we're trying to achieve X. I know we're trying to do that together. This is the result we're looking for. Here's what I need today. That's one context item. On Wednesday, my context is we're making great progress on this together this week. So I can kind of shift the context a little bit to where we've been in progress because of the great frequency of our communication, right? So we can let that adapt and evolve and grow as we move forward. All right, let's jump in from context. Well, what's next? What's next is action. Action. I hope that when we're communicating with clients, there is something we need them to do. And we need to be specific. We need to be specific. I know you've been asking your clients to do things for years, but let me tell you what happens. In fact, this is a true story from a firm. I try to make all my stories true story. I'll tell you if they're not a true story. But we were talking around, hey, you have to tell them what you need. And their response was, do I really though? I mean, I've been doing their taxes for 20 years. I send them an email and say, hey, that's that time of year again. Then they go back and they say, well, what do you need me to do for you? And I'm annoyed. My thought is, and my response back to them is, well, you shouldn't be annoyed. They should be annoyed. You did not tell them what it needs to do. It's that time of year again is part of the context. Not a great part, but we're getting there. At least it's some. But the action is, hey, here's what I need for you to do as we come into tax time. not assume it. Maybe that's the assumption that you've got, is that they're going to know the action to take place. Yeah, your client, you've done their tax return for 20 years. That means that they've done this action 20 times and once every 12 months. You and I can't even remember a password to that one website, and we have to reset it every 3 months, and we get annoyed, and then we forget what it is, and we try to type it in again, and we type it in wrong, right? We do the work we do every day, so the action's familiar and comfortable for us. Our clients don't. We have got to spell out the action that we need from them. In fact, I want you to think about it this way. What is it that your clients buy from you and value from you? And sometimes our knee-jerk reaction to that is, well, they're buying the tax return, they're buying the financial statements, they're buying the deliverables, but really, they're buying leadership. And action, being direct with what actions I need them to take, is part of the leadership value proposition that you're bringing. So I want to make sure that I give them action to take and give it with confidence, right? If we don't get explicit with the action we need them to take, that's when we start running some risks. And really, we don't do that often because we don't feel like we're in charge, or we're not sure, is the relationship there enough where I can push, right? Or we don't want to sound mean. We're trying to be kind, but we're actually subverting the relationship value when we don't give specific action. Okay, when we don't give specific action, we are undermining the value that they're coming to us from in terms of leadership. And I will also say this, that every action, every communication, has an action, even if there is no action. So perhaps we're delivering the tax return and we're just letting them know that the e-file happened. My action is to communicate to them, I don't need you to do anything right now except for know where you can go onto the portal and grab your return, be on the lookout for your refund, whatever that is. I don't need action from you. That way, every time when you're communicating with a client, they know, all right, if there's something they need me to do, they're going to tell me. And if they don't tell me to do anything, they're going to tell me not to do anything. And I can lean into that leadership of this accounting firm, which is a great value proposition for me within what we are doing. And so this leadership is an important piece. And when we talk about the action, I also want you to facilitate that action. Hey, I need you to upload your documents for us. Here's a link to our portal. I need you to upload the last bank statement to us. Remember, when you go into your bank login, here's how you get there. Here's what you do. I want to give them steps to execute. All right. For me, this is a big part of being aware of the context and putting their hat on, is that, hey, they're a busy business owner too. And if I give them a 12-step program by just saying, do this, they're never going to remember what the 12 steps were that we talked about before. I've got to remind them again, or I've got to include an attachment that walks them through how to do it if it's a little bit more on the complicated side. Again, I have to think about where they are when they're receiving this communication to really set that action up well. Right? Also, if I've done a good job of the context of tying this to the result, when the action is either challenging or perhaps the action is something that they don't like to do. It might not be difficult, but they don't like to do it. We all have those things in our lives that are not difficult, but I don't want to do it. Washing dishes, that's fun for me. Not difficult, don't really want to do it. But if we can tie the message to the result, then that will help them push through the, this isn't something I enjoy emotion that comes with it. So again, your context isn't just about that with the relationship. It's going to help drive the action that you need. It's going to help drive the action that you need. All right, let me check the comments here as we go. Ooh, what is another value element in telling them that there is no action when there's nothing to do? I think this also plays into the nature of the continual relationship you want to establish with your client and reinforce. Hey, everything's done with taxes. Maybe you meet them again in August and it's only May when you're sending out this communication. I want to remind them we've got a meeting coming up in August. You've got nothing to do until we get to that meeting and we're in place there. We'll see you then. The next action's on us to send you the agenda for that meeting, right? So here again, nothing for them to do, but you're showing leadership and you're showing that the relationship is continuing to move forward in the cycle, not just be quite so choppy, as it were. So that's another value I think that comes from stating the non-action as the action. I appreciate that comment. All right. So what on earth does the T stand for in catnip? We've got C, context, A, action. T is timeline. T is timeline. Well, as you know, just like with humor, timing is everything. But in business, timeliness is really, really important. Personal story. A few years ago, my wife said to me, hey, when's this project going to get done that we've talked about doing? It's still not done. You haven't made any progress on it. And in a moment of sincere clarity, and probably also a simultaneous lapse of judgment, I actually responded to her. And I said, well, yes, we know it's got to get done, but you never said when you wanted it done. And she said, well, I wanted it done by now. And then in a further lapse of judgment, I bothered to ask the question, of the things that we have done, what things should I have not have done so that that could get done by now? We're still married. Don't worry. We've worked through this. I've learned some lessons, right, in that process. But this concept of the timeline is really critical. Oftentimes, we make an assumption about the timeline. In fact, I believe this is the biggest assumption risk in your communications. Hey, we got to get the tax returns out. Don't forget to send me the other receipts that you talked about, your financials and the other receipts you talked about. Hey, you mentioned you had some other K1s coming. Send them in. Send them in when? Is that really urgent? So we've got to start with a timeline. Now, I want you to be thoughtful when it comes to the timeline, because there are two elements of asking for things in a timeline. One is when it's got to get done. And the other is when you need to have it so that it can be done. So telling someone, look, taxes are due 4/15, you got to send me this stuff. They may read that as, well, I can send it to you on the 14th. Everything will be just fine. I can send it to you on the morning of the 15th. Everything will be just fine, right? We've got to think about that a little bit. That may be part of the context. Hey, taxes are due the 15th, but for us to execute the work properly and make sure you've got the best result, here's when we need your information by, and give that date. Now, when you're communicating in mass to your clients about due dates and so forth, that's just fine. But when you're communicating to a client on a specific instance, let's say that we're working through some cash flow analysis and you need some other information from me as your client. If you come to me and say, hey, Will, for us to go over the cash flow analysis, I need all your information by Friday. Can you do that for me? I need to make sure that if I can't get it by Friday, giving it to you by Monday is still acceptable, right? So when we think about the timeline, I want to try to say, how can I put this in a collaborative sense so that if it doesn't work out, we've got a little bit of buffer room. Now, sometimes there's no time for buffer room, right? There's just no time. Okay, that's part of the context in the communication. Hey, we're up against it. We have no flexibility in the timeline. This must be accomplished by Friday. What is the must and the this? The action. And we're working through that, right? So we're setting the context. Again, we're telling them the action of what they've got to accomplish or how to accomplish it. And then the timeline, very clear. It's got to be done by Friday. Okay. So we've got to think through that timeline and make sure we're sharing it. Do not assume that the timeline is known. Another area to watch in the timeline is when it's not that pressureful. Is pressureful a real word? I don't know. We made it up. It is now. So perhaps you've got a couple months before this is relevant. You're in a meeting, we're talking to the client, and you say, "Oh yeah, that'll be important. When you get a chance, just give that to me." Even if you don't need it for 2 or 3 months, the when you get a chance is a recipe for it waiting in the end, and then we've got an urgency item later. So I still want to tell them, we're going to use that as we go through. Can you have that to me by a week from Friday? Now, of course, we need to think about the context. If they're not going to have it in their possession until 3 weeks from now, I don't want to put my timeline in front of when it's possible, right? But as long as I know that they've got it or they've got access to it, I want to give them a timeline. The sooner of a time I give them when I communicate with them, the better my result will be. In fact, this also applies to the action steps, but in the inverse. The further away I need them to do something, the more detailed I want to make sure that we get those steps. If I need it tomorrow, I can probably give some high-level steps, say, hey, do these things, get in there. Likely we've been over it recently, so this is repetition. But if we've talked about it and then I need them to do it 3 weeks later, I need to be more specific because it's been a while. It's out of mind space at that particular point in time. So, but we've got to set this particular timeline. We must set a timeline. All too often we don't, and this is where we end up into trouble. Back to my illustration earlier with the development folks at the company I used to work at, the timeline was a really big one. So I would be out working with clients, implementing a particular product, and need to know something about the future of a product, when an enhancement's coming out, this sort of thing. And the way I would write my email is, one, I wasn't giving enough context. But secondly, the biggest thing that I was doing is, because I wasn't setting a timeline, everything appeared as urgent. Now, do I think it appeared as urgent as the communicator? No. But when I put their hat on, all of a sudden I realized, oh, there's no timeline here. Will mentioned he was at a client's office, or we know Will's often working with clients. This must be urgent. Do not give your clients room to infer urgency or infer that this must not be relevant, right? For right now, we've got some time, we can wait. Don't leave that opportunity for assumption. Now, let's throw the Uno reverse on that for just a moment. When you're reading communications from your clients, you also have to not infer the timeline and urgency. I can't tell you how many firms, in fact, I can tell you 100% of firms that I've spoken with this about have urgency that was not there on the part of their client sending requests for information and questions to them. And what happens is, when we infer a timeline that's not necessary and we find out later it wasn't necessary, we go, oh, I'm so frustrated. I moved everything around. I delivered what I thought was great service, and it wasn't even necessary. Not having a timeline is a recipe for a relationship problem. When there are relationship problems, the actions I want them to do start to suffer in terms of timeliness and in terms of quality, right? So setting timeline is important, not just for this one action, but it helps to continue to build that relational expectation as we go forward. All right. So perhaps you're sitting there going, you know what, Will, I figured out the context, action, and timeline, but this NIP part, what on earth are we talking about? Well, as we know with catnip, it brings them back. It invites and encourages interaction. In that case, with the litter box, I'm not asking you to refer to your firm as a litter box. Okay, that's not the analogy I'm trying to drive. I just now thought of that. That's terrible. But I want to invite some response back. If I'm just sending off one-way communications, I have no way to know, did the context resonate? Are the actions clear? Is the timeline okay? I want to invite this response back from them. Let me tell you, when we invite response, I also want to invite buy-in and agreement. Let me ask you, when someone tells you to do something and somebody else has you agree with them to do something, which one are you going to do first? Which one are you going to do more completely with the right attitude? It's going to be the one that you have agreement on, because you've put part of yourself into that and you feel like there's a togetherness, not just taking orders, right? So I want to invite response, and I'm going to work our way back up the cat analogy for the invite response. So the first opportunity and the easiest opportunity we have to invite response is with the timeline. Hey, Joel, I need this by Friday. Is that something you can accomplish for us? So I'm inviting that response back so he can then tell me, yes, I can do it by Friday. Or he can say, Will, I can't do it by Friday. Best I can do is Tuesday. All right? Now we know, because what I can do on my calendar is I can go and put a reminder for first thing Wednesday morning. If I haven't gotten it from Joel yet, call him again. Hey, you promised me Tuesday. Didn't happen. What's going on? That's a terrible email. Don't actually write that one, but you get the point, right? I think this is so valuable for knowing when to follow up. I hear this from team members at firms all the time. Hey, partner said to go follow up with this client because they haven't sent stuff in. But when do I follow up? Like 2 days after my initial request? 3 days? 4 days? 5 days? And we're just sitting there in limbo. We don't want to crush them, but we don't want to not get it. This is a missing piece. I didn't invite the response back to know what kind of expectation to have. Okay. Now, sometimes the timeline is not able to be flexed. So don't ask, is Friday okay, if there's no choice but Friday? If there's no choice but Friday, I have to communicate that as part of the context. I said that a little bit earlier. Say, look, we've got to have this by Friday. Now I'm going to invite the response back on the action. We were looking for this particular invoice. Here's the portal to load it to. Here's this. Here's how you do it. Are these instructions clear enough for you? So I'm going to invite the response back on the action. Do they know what to do? Do they need further support executing that work, right? So if the timeline isn't available to invite response, I want to invite response in the action, right? What's our knee-jerk response when we don't do something on time? After, I'm sorry, I was busy, the next step is, I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't know how long it would take, right? So the action becomes that next crutch. So if the timeline, we have no flex there, I'm going to go back and I want to go hit after their action crutch. Make sure they can reply back and go, yes, your instructions are simple. I understand what I'm doing. Because now when they go to do it, they go, no, I told them I know what I'm doing. I know what I need to do. I just need to actually do it, even if I don't like to do it. Then if you feel like there's no real response back in the action steps because it's something that is beyond basic of what needs to be done, I want to invite response back in the context. Hey, we need it by Friday. You got to drop it off at our office. Do you understand what happens if we don't have this by Friday? So I just want them to then verify, yep, I get it. There's consequences because of the context that we're operating in if I don't execute. So that's how I want to invite response. Just work my way back up timeline, action, and then context. Let's check for comments or questions here. So someone asking a little bit about people at different levels of the organization, right? I think this kind of inviting the response, if you're one who has the authority to communicate with clients, which I hope is most people at a firm, quite frankly, then yes, you should be doing this as well. You don't have to be the client partner or the accountant in charge to be the one inviting and asking for a response, okay? So that's something else to consider there. All right. Let me tell you something. You got to stick with it. Remember, your 1000th time, it could be there first, right? And for us, as you stick with this process of how you communicate, doing it over and over is going to bring comfort. The first time is going to be a bit unusual, right? In fact, when I first started doing this, what I would do is as soon as when I hit new email or I hit reply, I made sure there's no email address in the to line. Put in the subject, and I would put in there, hello, Joel, comma, and then work through that process and make sure that I've kind of cleared out, hey, I've got good context, the action and the steps are clear. I've laid out the timeline and invited some response back. Okay, I feel good there. Now I'm going to put the email address up into the top. And just going through that routine brings a little bit of comfort. I would also encourage you to do this internally in your communications, right? One of my son's favorite baseball coach that he's had over the years told the kids at one of their first practices, said, hey, every practice, you're in long pants, you're in shorts, you have a hat, you got your glove. We practice how we're going to play because we play how we practice. When the pressure's on, we go back to our muscle memory and the things that we've established. So if you're practicing your communication internally in this format, it becomes easier to play when it counts sometimes with the clients in this format as well. Stick with it. Don't give up. You will start to see results. Hey, I've got another question in here. I was asking if someone you're working with is not an owner, but is the next best alternate. How can you motivate them to action? So this is a great question. I appreciate you putting this up there for us as well. I think one of the things is good context. They're not the owner. So what is going on in their mind, right? So I need to know what they're thinking. Hey, I know that. Are they someone who is super task oriented? Are they someone who likes to be independent and yet the owner likes to be a bit of an overseer? So how is it that them taking action with you allows them to express their independence, right? So I just need to know more about the context that's there, right? I also think we have to consider the action we're asking for and say, is this the person that's going to actually do it, right? So maybe our contact is the CFO at a particular business, but we know that it's not the CFO that's going to take the action. It's someone in their accounting group internally. So how can I consider that in my communication? I may not have their contact information, but I may say, hey, CFO, here's what you need done. I know that's not you that's going to do this. Here are the steps that they need to follow. So it makes it easier for them to delegate over. One thing that I would also say is that it's a little bit dangerous when you're working with someone who's not the owner. I don't want to threaten with owner's involvement, right? So I don't want to negatively motivate. I want to tie back again. Hey, what's the value of getting this done? Hey, we know here's what we need. We need online access to the bank account so we can get financial statements out in a timely manner. Look, you've told me before you get irritated when ownership comes around and is asking questions and we're not ready. Doing this is how you're going to be ready to answer questions from ownership. So if you're not sure what the motivation trigger is, you're not sure you know enough about what their hat looks like, even to put it on, you may have to have some get to know you type conversations, right? And say, hey, as we're working together, it's going to help me serve you as I know more about you and the things that motivate you, what you like about your job, how you see your value with your organization if they're not the owner. So having a little bit of that conversation, working that in will help build more tools into your tool belt as we go through that. So I appreciate that question as well. So let me go back to where we started. I want to revisit that email again. So remember, we had an existing client. We need some stuff to get the books done so we can get their tax returns done. It was around estimated payments. Yeah. How do you write the email this time? So go back and look. If you wrote down a few notes, go back and look at those notes and then Just say, hey, did I set context? Was I clear with the action? Maybe had some facilitated action steps that were part of that? Did I give a timeline? And anywhere in here, especially at the end, did I invite a response back? So I just encourage you to kind of look back at those notes, and hopefully if you took a few notes when I first put this up on the screen, going back, you can see where some practical application may change the result and change the trajectory as you go forward. Well, that is what I wanted to make sure that we went through today. I would encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got my email address up on the screen there as well. I do try to stay fairly active on LinkedIn. And if you want to carry on this conversation with me a little bit more, happy to do that. I absolutely have a great passion for helping firms and people in firms excel at what they do as they service their clients. So I appreciate your time today. And with that, Joel, let me turn it back over to you with Earmark to close us out.
Thank you so much for hosting today's webinar, Will, and thank you to all of our attendees live today. And with that, I wish you a great day and the great rest of your week. And with that, I will show the outro video.
Today's webinar has ended. We hope you enjoyed it. To earn CPE for watching, download the free Earmark app. Scan the QR code on the screen to visit the download page. Open the app and create your account. Use a valid email address where you will receive CPE certificates. Then register for the course. You can search for it by tapping on the magnifying glass icon on the home screen and then entering the name of this webinar. If you're attending the live stream of this webinar, keep an eye out for an email letting you know when the quiz is available in the next few days. Pass the quiz to earn your CPE credits, then tap the button to email yourself a CPE certificate. Stay tuned for more webinars from Earmark. We appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.